Faith, family, business, adventure. This is the Phoenix Podcast with Ken Sharpe.
Good evening and welcome to the Phoenix Podcast Show. I'm extremely excited to introduce you to our special guest tonight. But before I do that, let me just say, this is the place where we show exceptional people with really interesting stories. The phoenix is the bird that rises from the ashes, and we love to tell stories of people that have risen from the ashes. Tonight, I would like to introduce you to Mrs. Margaret de Haast. Amboya, she likes to be known as Amboya de Haast, Gogo de Haast. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So going back in history, I'm going to take you back in time. Mrs. de Haast was born in Roodepoort, South Africa in 1938. Yes, she is 87 years old. She is the elder in the room. She's one of the oldest people. In fact, she is the oldest person we've interviewed on this show. And I know she has a wealth of experience, but she wants you to know her as firstly a daughter of God. She's a devout Catholic from the Third Order of the Franciscans. She was involved in bringing Pope John Paul II to Zimbabwe. And she also wants you to know that she is a wife of her husband, the late Mr. Jan de Haast. She is also a mother of children and a grandmother. Welcome again, Mrs. de Haast.
Thank you very much.
So on this show, we talk about faith, business, adventure, politics, and some of the times people shy away from politics. So I want to bring up that subject first, because I know you can share a lot about faith and business, which we'll get to. But I want you to talk tonight from your heart about politics, because you've experienced the politics of Zimbabwe of yesteryear in the white minority rule of Southern Rhodesia, of then Rhodesia, of then Ian Smith, Robert Mugabe, independence of Zimbabwe. And even up to date, you've been visiting Zimbabwe and have seen what's happened in the last 7 decades.
Yeah.
So take us back to those early years.
Those early years. I came to Rhodesia, was Southern Rhodesia then, and from Johannesburg. And when I arrived, it reminded me, because it was during the Federation time, that it was a little bit like South Africa had been in the past, before the nationalist government came into power, because I saw black people in the reception and working in senior positions. So it was like going back into the past for me. So my husband opened the Jameson Hotel in 1957, and it became operational in 1958. At that time, it was the first interracial hotel in Southern Africa. And
so your husband actually allowed black people in the hotel before independence?
It was licensed specifically for that. And so, unfortunately, sad to say, it was not really well accepted by the white Rhodesians.
I'm sure there was an uproar.
It was difficult years to get people to accept that really black people were exactly the same as white people. They're born the same way, they die the same way, they live the same way, that there was no difference. But there was definitely an obstacle to it, because Federation at that time had not been too long in an existence. So it was the beginning of an understanding of a more mixed community. Well, in our hotel, we had, because of the situation in the country still, even before Ian Smith's time, black people could stay in the hotel, and married black and white couples could stay in the hotel, because that was the only place they could stay in Southern Rhodesia. And I'm not sure if many of the young people know the name of Lawrence Vamby. He was married to a German lady, and when he worked for Anglo-American, and when he came back to Southern Rhodesia for Anglo-American to work, because that was the policy at the time, was to integrate black men and women into the workplace. So he lived in the Jameson because he couldn't live in a black township because he had a white wife. He couldn't live in a white suburb because he was black. So their children and my children were together in the Jameson.
So can you imagine, viewers, what we're hearing here is amazing. A black person and a white person married together, interracial marriage, could not live in their home, so they had to live in the hotel.
Yes, yeah. So although when Ian Smith came in, as personally feeling, I have to say that, and I'm not ashamed to say it, he was a disaster, personally. And for my husband, there were many occasions that my husband would tell him that he was a dishonest man.
Dishonest.
Yes, because he would say something to the white businessmen to encourage them to invest and to work, but he'd say something publicly to the white people of the land. I'm sure even existing today here, there may be white Rhodesians who will not be happy with what I've said, but it's true. It was a reality. So the only good thing for me that came out of UDI was that it made Rhodesia more independent of Britain, because industry began to form, because everything came from England.
So tell us about that. Before UDI, before the
everything
declaration,
came from Britain.
All the products,
the clothes. After UDI, because of sanctions, you couldn't find you couldn't find needles, cotton, wool, nothing. So began the industry here, and I mean, if that's for me the only good thing that happened at UDI.
And do you remember UDI? Can you take us back to
Yes, I remember sitting. We were all instructed by Mr. Smith to sit at the radio at 1 o'clock on the 11th of November. I don't know what the date is now.
Must be 1965.
Yes. To sit and listen to his broadcast. Yeah, 1 o'clock. With all our staff at the Jameson, we were in the function room, and I was upstairs with all the housekeeping staff, and we listened to the broadcast. I cried. It was a disaster for the nation.
So you knew it wasn't going to be...
it couldn't work. And then, of course, through UDI became the underground movement for independence from to take back the land. And yeah, you had the war, you had the liberation struggle, and I, as a Catholic, prayed with both the Rhodesian troops and the freedom fighters. So could I say to an injured freedom fighter that they were wrong and God didn't love them? No. So I worked going into the bush often and talking to groups of people, but I prayed with both sides of that struggle. Yeah.
And then coming to 1979.
Then 1979, they started with the negotiations with Britain because economically South Africa had decided to cut off supplies too. So they had decided to cut the petrol and had said Ian Smith had to make a settlement.
So there was immense pressure.
Yeah, and so the place that the British government met was in our apartment in the Jameson Hotel, with a lot of the nationalists would come there, and at that time even Mozarewa, as many people will know, there was this Zimbabwe Rhodesia, this crazy situation of trying to have both sides appeased, but you can't appease both sides. You have to do what is true. You can't have two opposites. So we would move out, and they would take over our apartment, and they would meet there. And I know for a fact that it was said after the negotiations that the farmers would be all right. And that was, I think, the one thing that hurt Mr. Mugabe, was that the British government did not honour their agreement with the nationalists. And as a consequence, he never really forgave the British government for that. And when we left here in 1980, because Ian Smith still had not come to that point of signing an agreement, and my husband was called up for 3 months of every year. Every man, a white man, was called up from the age of 18 to 50, and it became impossible to run the hotel. So we left. We would not have left if that settlement had happened before. We left purely and simply because we didn't see an end to the war situation, which became very intense at the end.
I believe the hotel was trusted.
The
People
hotel
like Josh Nkomo,
yes.
Robert Mugabe,
They were all
would
there
come and
because they knew my husband wouldn't allow it to be bugged.
Mm-hmm. So take us back to the 80s. You then came back into the country later?
Yes, we went to South Africa. My husband was a Hollander. He'd never lived in South Africa. He came from Europe straight to Zambia, to the Ridgeway, and the Jameson were brother and sister hotels. And then he came here. So he'd never lived in South Africa. So we went to South Africa. And for him, it was a transition period because working in South Africa was a very different situation to working with Zimbabweans. It's a different nation. It's a different people. Zimbabweans are a people who know about hospitality, who know about etiquette, who have traditions of which they have held on to. So he was overjoyed when Mr. Mugabe asked Zimbabwe Sons to bring him back to the country. So we came back into Zimbabwe in 1987.
And he then ran.
And then he
Zimbabwe
took over
Sons.
the Zimbabwe Sons as operation director, and we did extensive training, both of us, in the Zimbabwe Sun hotels, all units, to bring them. Mr. Mugabe wanted the hotels to be lifted back to the standard that they had been previously.
So let's talk about Mr. Mugabe, Robert Mugabe. I believe you wrote a letter to him. Would you
I
mind
did.
sharing with us what that letter was
Yes, I
about?
did. I wrote to him. When I used to be introduced in South Africa by ex-Rhodesians, I call them Rhodesians because they never immigrated to Zimbabwe, so they were Rhodesians. They would say, "This is my friend, Mrs. Haast. She's the only one who loves Robert Mugabe." So I wrote to him because I felt that when he came into power, he had done so much good. He brought roads to rural areas. He put clinics where there were never clinics before. I mean, as a Catholic, I'm associated with the Catholic institutions. Matemwa was one of them.
That's the lepers?
The leper colony, where they rebuilt with Sally Mugabe, his wife, new housing for them. They were living in the most appalling conditions, really. So, being with this new president and watching what he did, and then I knew that in his heart, many of the people, the white people particularly of the country, had not crossed over from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe.
Hold that thought for 1 minute. We'll be back. We'll take a short commercial break.
Faith, family, business, adventure. This is the Phoenix Podcast with Ken Sharpe.
Welcome back. And talking about that crossing over from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe, Mrs. de Haast, I feel very particular about myself as an individual, because as a young man of 16, I left Zimbabwe, not wanting to ever come back again. But when I came back as a 17-year-old, I made a conscious decision that I would embrace the new Zimbabwe. And whatever happened in the past was not part of my doing, but I embraced the future Zimbabwe. So I feel fully Zimbabwean. As much as any black or multiracial, multicolored Zimbabwean, I feel equal to any Zimbabwean. So take us back to what you were talking about in that crossover and what Robert Mugabe did, and of course your letter.
So I wrote him a letter because I felt that both of us were getting old, and both of us had experienced two sides of a country. And I also knew that he had never really forgiven that part of the hurt, or the letdown, the disappointment, because I think aid would have been more freely available at the beginning of independence. So I wrote to him and I asked him if he could forgive the white people for the hurts of the past, and that he should remember the good achievements that the country had made since independence, and that he had a nation of people who were unique, had the ability and the character to rebuild the nation. And he wrote back. In fact, he wrote twice back to me, in which he remembered me because he used to call me Ambuya. When we rebuilt the Elephant Hills, he had a lot of interest in coming to check on what we were doing. And many people, particularly the young Zimbabweans today, don't know that that hotel, when it was opened, never had a trial run. It was open to all the heads of the Commonwealth, cold.
This was Chogam.
That was Chogam. And they were from 18 to about 30. They were all young Zimbabweans, male and
workers.
Female.
The hotel workers.
Yeah. And he was so proud, Mugabe, of that hotel and that achievement. And it was wonderful that he called me up to his suite. The guards came and said, Ambuya, President wants to see you. So I went up and I sat with him. And he said, I felt so proud of my nation. And I said, yes, you have every reason to be proud of them. But I said, they need good mentors. Everybody in life needs to have a good mentor, somebody who can show them how to do it the right way. And I said, when they have that, your people can achieve anything they want. Anything they want. So I wrote because of that, and he said he remembered, and I then asked him to forgive the white people of the country for the hurts that they had caused. And he said it was difficult to forgive when you can't do it individually. It is much easier to look at somebody and say, I forgive you. And I just, and he said to me, he said, you know what, you're a white woman with a black heart. And I said, it's because I think you have a wonderful nation here. You have a nation of people who are unique, who have a capacity and an ability to be whatever they want to be. And I believe that. And you use the phoenix. And what did I say to Mr. Mugabe? I said, Mr. President, Africa will rise like a phoenix.
No, you didn't tell him
Yes,
that.
yes, yeah. And coming back at different times, I can see it now coming back in a wonderful way. And sometimes in life we have to really go down to the bottom to rise up. And I see it. I was here a year ago, and I already see in 1 year the achievement of a nation of which they can be proud of. Zimbabweans need to be proud of who they are and what they are able to do and what they should be able to do and allowed to do, because you have the character. Your character of your nation is such. So, yeah.
So can I safely say, Ambuya de Haast, that Zimbabwe is the phoenix rising?
Absolutely.
You've heard it, audience.
Absolutely.
So let me just close off this thing of politics and go back. Prior to Smith, during Robert Mugabe's time, and now with our current president in his second term, President Mnangagwa, who you've met, if you were sitting next to him now and talking to him, and more importantly, talking to the next successor of President Mnangagwa, who will come in next, and maybe to the future generation of presidents in Zimbabwe, what message would you tell them?
The message I would tell him, because I think by nature, this nation is of a spiritual nature. It is a unique people. It's not a big nation, but it is a unique people. But what the country needs is honest politicians who are not afraid to be honest. I think that young people need to be led and guided, and the traditional values of this nation need to be upheld. And they have traditional values in this nation that have a strength that I don't believe they've ever really fully tapped into. And I did see that when Mr. Mugabe first came into power. I saw that he had that ability to tap into the nation. I mean, he himself would go to the leper colony, he himself. So for the young Zimbabweans, you do not have to feel second-class citizens in the world. You are not. You can, you will, and you should be first world.
I'm going to say amen to that. So talking about Zimbabwean culture, hard work, discipline, take us back to the business side. I believe you were really involved in the hotels, housekeeping in particular.
Yes, I was.
Share some of the experiences of what you've learned over the years.
Well, what I learned, you know, when I first came, of course, I came from South Africa, from Johannesburg. I grew up with a mother who taught me never to judge a man by the color of his skin, nor the the cut of his cloth. So a poor man was as good as a rich man. So never to judge. So when I came here, I really, in the hotel industry, they were either white women or all black men. The black women were not really working at that stage in hotels. So I was a young 21-year-old woman, and I worked with men who were older than me. And so I was always very conscious of the fact that they probably knew more than I did. And that what I had to do was to learn from them, and then they would learn from me what I could give them. So my years in the Jameson were very happy and were very formative years. And as a committed Christian and Catholic, we built a chapel in our hotel, and that was during the different times in Africa where there were like Mozambique and Congo and Angola, the struggles in these different parts of Africa, that people could come and pray. So there was a chapel there. So I've always upheld my Christian values, that male, female, white, black, we are all the same. So my Christian values have always been at the center of my life. And I think probably if you were to speak to the men that were with me in those days, they would probably say the same. I mean, when I first came to Rhodesia, the men were working in shorts. Well, I said men can't work in shorts because they are 50 years of age. Those are for little boys. They have to have trousers, you see. So the concept of for me was human dignity, I think. That for me has always been very, very important. So I loved my staff.
So we're going to come back to the staff, but tell us about these war-torn countries. I believe the refugees would come to the hotel.
Yes, we were in Broken Hill at the first lot of the Congo refugees who came through, and then at the Jameson we had the Mozambicans and Angolans, and of course in South Africa at that time you may be married, you may have had 10 children, but one was white, one was black. They couldn't go to South Africa, so they came through to Zimbabwe, and Southwest Africa was the same.
So it was actually a place of refuge.
It was a place of refuge, yeah, where people felt safe and secure.
And how did you achieve the level of excellence with your staff? What are some of the tips you can give us today that we can be using?
I think it was because, as I said, Zimbabweans have a unique nature, and want to always, it's not to be a servant, it is to treat people with respect. So to train a Zimbabwean is very easy. It's not that easy in other parts of Africa, but it was very easy here. So to train the staff and also to recognize that some people may start at the bottom of the tree, but actually you can help them achieve high levels. I mean, I've trained bedroom attendants who now have become hotel general managers, right in the rest of Africa.
So hold that thought, training someone from the bottom of the tree to rise up into the top. We'll be back shortly.
Faith, family, business, adventure. This is the Phoenix Podcast with Ken Sharpe.
I'm Boya de Haast. We have so much still to cover. But you know, you're talking about those little seeds, I'll call them, that you plant in the ground. And we know in faith the mustard seed is the smallest, and yet it can be one of the greatest trees. I wanted you to share, if you don't mind, some of the experiences of individuals in the hotel that have been humbling. And one of them that you mentioned is this certain military man, a major general.
Yes. There was a time when the army began to put its more senior members into industry, to lift industry and to go into positions of senior positions. And so there was a man, my husband phoned and said, I'm sending you a man, can you please put him in the housekeeping department and let him see what a housekeeping, how it's run. So I said, sure. But he didn't tell me his background. And to be very honest, I have to say, it would not have mattered to me. I would have reacted in exactly the same way. Anyway, he arrived, and if he's still alive and listening to me, I have to tell him personally, I respected him enormously by his reaction, because he came in and I said, my husband has said you will arrive. I'll give you to Sylvester. Sylvester will take you and give you a uniform, and then he'll take you to the bedrooms and he will show you how to do. This man never said a word. He just said, thank you very much, and off he went. Later in the morning, my husband phoned and said, did the man arrive, the major arrive from the army? I said, yes, he did. I said, he's a major? You didn't tell me he was a major from the army. Yes, he said. Oh, I forgot to tell you. Anyway, he came down at lunchtime and I sat with him. And I said to him, Major, I'm not going to mention his name, but Major, you never told me who you were. He said, no, Mrs. de Haast. Why would I? I said, it wouldn't have changed what I would have asked you to do. He said, I'm going to tell you a story about the army and why I'm obedient. He said, when I have a battalion of men and I'm out in the bush, and I could visualize it because I used to go into the bush and pray with the freedom fighters myself, so I knew what he was talking about. He said, if I tell my men to lie down and one doesn't, I will shoot him because he's a danger to the whole population. So he said, that's why I'm obedient. And I had a deep respect for that man because he had been in a position that I had never been in. He was a very senior member of the freedom fighters. And yet he had been obedient. He had done what he was asked to do.
Doing what we asked to do, being obedient. We just experienced the Sister to Sisters annual All Africa conference for nuns in Harare. They invited me as the guest of honor. I have no idea why. But there were 3 things that they told me they did. Their vows of chastity, of poverty, and of obedience. And the greatest thing we can do in life is be obedient.
Absolutely.
So talking to the young generation out there today, to bring this business discussion to close, because I want to leave enough time for you personally to share your story. But what would you tell them? Look into the camera and tell the youth of today some of the things they can do in their lives to be more obedient, to be more proficient, to learn skills from their elders, from people with more experience.
Yeah, I think one of the things for young people today is that because they think, and that's true, they are highly educated today. And in Zimbabwe, you're a very educated nation, but there's still things you can learn from your older generation. You need to sit with them and hear their stories. For discipline, self-discipline and obedience, well, just like that major, is what says you are in control of your emotions, and that you don't allow your emotions to control you. So just because you like to have beer doesn't mean you have to have 10 beers. You can have one beer and it's just as valuable, and probably more so than the 10, because you don't taste it after a while. So discipline for the young people is very important, and young Zimbabweans need to know they have the capacity, they have the ability, they have the education to take their nation to first world. Nobody can do it for them. They have to do it for themselves.
Amen to that.
Don't look outside of your country to make money. Look within your country to make the money, to share the money, to grow your country.
Amen.
That's what is needed here. Many Zimbabweans who are living in South Africa today are not living as well and as safely as you are living in Zimbabwe. And this broadcast can go to South Africa. I don't worry about it, because it's true. And black Zimbabweans here and white Zimbabweans here think the grass is greener on the other side. It's not. You can make it greener where you are. This is where God has put you. This is where you have to develop it. And you know that when Mr. Smith took you that UDI, the Jameson Hotel and every hotel in this country was emptied. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, every hotel had no bookings.
On the same day?
Same day.
Declaration
of Independence.
Business gone.
Gone.
Amazing.
So we had to start from the beginning. Building. And you can do it again. You have it, the abilities. Don't let yourselves be rated as second-class citizens as a country, because that's not true. You have natural wealth, but most of all you have human wealth, which is more valuable than mineral wealth. But what you do need is good mentors. You need to have good mentors in your country. People who can, if I think back at that army major, that was a well-disciplined man who maybe he didn't want to go and clean a bedroom and clean a bathroom and toilet, but he did so because that was what he was requested to do.
Doing what's required of us.
What is required of you.
So in the last 6-7 minutes, Amboya, I want you to go back into your personal life. I know you have a very romantic story of meeting your husband at the Jameson, falling in love, traveling on honeymoon through Africa. Tell us what it was like in those days.
Well, first of all, when I got married, we traveled by car from what was then Salisbury in a little Morris Minor right through southern Rhodesia, which it was, northern Rhodesia, into Tanganyika, into Kenya, into Uganda, and into the Congo. Those were the names that were in existence in that little Morris Minor.
Now bear in mind the wheel of a Morris Minor is about that size.
There were no tarred roads. Many places, the people living there had never seen a white person. We stopped at the side of the road because we saw some fruit. And out came all the people from the bush, especially the women, just to touch my skin because they'd never seen a white woman. So Africa was... I know you have to have borders, I understand. But it was a time in Africa that wasn't always good. That's true. It wasn't always good because it was they were colonized. Africa was colonized. And so, but just to be able to freely go.
So you're saying you could travel with no border?
No passports, no borders. We just
drove anywhere?
Just drove.
No one would stop you?
No, nobody stopped. It was a magical time, really. And
how long did that journey take?
That took us over 6 weeks.
6 weeks of driving?
Yes, yeah.
So coming back to your faith, and I know you're a woman of extreme obedience when it comes to your dedication to the Lord. How were you as a young child? I believe you've outlived your younger brother and your older brother.
Yes.
Were you a strong person? Tell us a bit about yourself.
No, actually, when I was born, I only weighed 3 3/4 pounds, so I was very small.
That's 2 kgs.
And I was so small that my father put me in a shoebox, and it was winter, middle of winter, and wrapped me in cotton wool in a shoebox by the fire, an open fire. So that's how I started my life on a farm, in a shoebox. So I'm a shoebox baby.
There you go, from the ashes.
And now I'm an elephant. So, yeah, yeah.
How did you find your faith? How did you find
my
Christ?
faith? I think that there's some people who find faith and other people who are born with a faith. And I think when I was baptized, I was 6 when I was baptized. I remember my baptism.
As a Catholic?
No, as an Anglican.
As an Anglican.
Then. I remember my baptism, and I remember that was in that way I met God face to face. So although I talk about Jesus, I often talk about God the Father more because that's what I knew as a child. So, of course, faith grows, and your faith grows as God allows you to meet other people, because through other people you learn, like that major. I learned humility from that major. So all your life you never stop learning about how to come closer to God. I'm not physically very strong. And I know that whatever I do, it's not because it's in my strength, but it is in His strength.
Amen.
Yeah. So I'm only here by the grace of God.
Aren't we all?
Yes.
So tell us about faith with leaders. I mean, Ian Smith, I don't know if you mind sharing, you mentioned something about his wife and...
Yes. Well, Mr. Smith, I have to say, and I'm sure there's still a lot of people who will not agree with me, but that's fine. Mr. Smith was not my favorite, right? Because I think he took the country backwards instead of forwards. And I think Zimbabwe would not have been in the position it was when Mr. Mugabe came in. It would have been richer, and maybe lots of Zimbabweans don't remember that, but towards the end of Ian Smith's reign or time in office, Zimbabwe had become poorer again because everywhere in the world resources had been cut off. And his wife, she was very involved in spiritualism.
Mm-hmm. So this is witchcraft.
Yes, yeah. And so...
We don't often think of white people in witchcraft.
Yeah, but yes, so you need to know that. And often she would give him messages from the spiritualist. So God was not in that time.
So you could say he was not a godly man. He was not a Christian.
No.
And looking at the
and I don't judge him.
Right.
Only God can judge him. But no. And I don't know if you still have in Zimbabwe what you call a pink paper.
Yes.
Which is the Financial Times, I think.
It's now the Financial Gazette.
So,
yes.
Yeah. And I remember coming back from being somewhere with my 2 children and the headlines of the paper. Mr. Haast says, Mr. Smith has made his biggest mistake ever. And I thought, that's it, we're going to be deported. So politically, we were here for the people of Zimbabwe. And I'm here again for the people of Zimbabwe. You know,
Well, we're honored.
I only said yesterday, if I could only be 50 years of age now, I could come back and work with the people here and help them to put things together.
Haast, we need so much more time with you. Please come back to Zimbabwe. We've reached the end of our program. But finally, just one sentence. Look into the camera there and pass on that message that you have for our audience today.
I wish Zimbabwe so many blessings. Just remember now, you're rising out of the down. You're rising up. Build on the up in faith and trust in each other. Don't be envious of each other. Build each other up, for that is the strength of this nation.
And as I hear that final message of uhunu, of togetherness, may we look beyond the current scenario and see each other as one people in Zimbabwe. I also feel extremely honored tonight to say that this is my aunt, my father's sister. It's been a privilege having you, Auntie Margaret.
Thank you.
Good night. Pay it forward, like and share. Thank you.
Pray for me.
We will pray.
Faith, family, business, adventure. This is the Phoenix Podcast with Ken Sharpe.